So you were just starting to tell me just like your nomad background, moving all over. Let's first I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell me about your background and what led you into this world of plant medicine.
So, I was just sharing that I grew up overseas in East Asia, in South Korea, and then Okinawa, Japan. My family, my parents worked for the government, and then my high school years were in the Washington, D.C. area. Mm-hmm. And then after undergraduate medical school at University of Virginia, I was in Los Angeles for 5 years. And then now I'm practicing medicine in a totally different way than I thought I would be. In Portland, Oregon. And so, for people who don't know who I am, I'm a licensed medical doctor. I trained in Pediatric Orthopedic Surgery, super subspecialized.
So amazing. So amazing.
But so different than what I do now.
Mm-hmm. And just like we were talking before about evolutions, how so much of what we do, like we think we start doing something some way and that's what we're going to do, and we evolve and we have to be okay with that. But so Pediatric Orthopedic Surgery. So that's what you went to medical school for.
I mean, I was always interested in surgery, but then you get into medical school, and none of my family comes from the world of medicine. I'm the first one in my family. So that was really my first real exposure to kind of the inside of the American healthcare system and what modern medicine really is all about. And I would say I always had an interest in preventative medicine too. When I was in medical school, I was fascinated by everything. Just the human body and the human experience is fascinating to me. But then when I saw what it actually meant to practice medicine, that's a very different thing. And so I, for various reasons, ended up down the path of orthopedic surgery, and then I love children. And again, that preventative medicine piece, you can intervene in a child's life so much earlier and maybe have an effect that sets them on a different path than they otherwise would have been. Now, though, I practice with psilocybin, so therapeutic use of psilocybin. And I often get the question, like, how did you end up going from?
It makes perfect sense to me, but I'm like more educated in this space, but I totally get that.
It seems like a total 90-degree turn. And so, I think there's so many layers to it. It was a very sort of gradual thing to make the kind of step into this role where now I'm a licensed psilocybin facilitator.
Amazing.
And I practice more integrative medicine. So instead of with pharmaceuticals and surgery like I practiced with before, now my toolkit are earth medicines,
plants,
herbs, or
things,
fungi, or there's even animal-based psychedelics. I'm fascinated by psychedelic medicines, sort of as a category, and really passionate about the reintroduction of these medicines into our societies. They're actually, in the case of psilocybin, it's an ancient medicine that we as humans all over the world most likely were working with millennia ago. There's evidence of it.
What's so interesting, I was watching Bill Maher the other day, and he had a doctor on that was talking about healthcare in America and how so many, most doctors are trained to really just not necessarily get to like the holistic root cause, but it's just like treating each thing at a time and not looking at it holistically. And I feel like that's probably what urged you to look at plant medicine. You didn't want to just be this doctor that was just like prescribing one thing to the next. So what was it about plant medicine that felt different? And what was it also, I know two-part questions are annoying, but just like about healthcare in this country that was discouraging you and that then motivated you to get into plant medicine?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way to answer this would be just to share my experience of what it was like to be going through medical school and into residency. So, about halfway through medical school, that's when you enter into the hospitals and clinics, and you're actually working with patients closely. And that's when, you're finally on the front lines of what's coming in through emergency rooms, or why people, are coming to doctors for help. And while modern medicine is working miracles daily on so many more acute conditions, so more urgent, emergent situations. If you get into a car accident, we can save your life now in a way that, you're not going to go to herbs for something like that. Right. That being said, there is, I would say, the vast majority of what presents to the healthcare system today is actually chronic lifestyle behavioral based conditions that arise largely, and this is an understanding I didn't develop until much later as I was, years into my residency training, that actually have their roots in psycho-spiritual, maybe childhood trauma, intergenerational trauma, these kinds of roots that then manifest as
sickness.
Coping, certain maladaptive coping mechanisms that are initially help us in our survival of those experiences or whatever we may have inherited, but then become maladaptive later. And so I was training for my residency training in South Central Los Angeles in a Medicaid hospital. So the extreme, I was seeing extreme manifestations of this, just, intergenerational poverty and that sort of thing. And that was what was most distressing to me as a physician, was not feeling like we had the tools to really help people when it came to intervening on that level of things. It felt like a lot of what we were doing were sort of Band-Aid solutions, or even causing harm in some ways with the interventions that we were working with. And so interestingly, I really kind of stumbled onto this path because when I was a first year in my training, by that point, I was already, made it through medical school, made it through the intensely competitive process of matching into, competitive specialty. And I say I was already burnt out before I even started.
I can imagine. It sounds so grueling.
It was so grueling. And I was when I think back to, my former self in those years, I mean, the stress and the anxiety just took such a toll, and I didn't have any of the tools that I have now. And so I was, fairly disillusioned already in my first year of training. I was thinking, how am I going to make it through 5 years of this surgery training and working 80 hours a week?
God, I can't. I cannot imagine.
I was actually terrified.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I was, I started work this summer of my first year of training. I just moved to Los Angeles. I didn't know, none of my close friends or family are there.
So alone, so isolated.
Yes, I was living alone for the first time.
LA is not a city where you can easily just meet people anyways.
No, let alone when you're working 80 hours.
No, exactly. There's no time anyways. Yeah.
So I was just like, what is my life? What did I sign up for?
Right.
I was getting terrible sleep because just the demands of the job and everything. So I actually started a meditation practice at that time, just because I didn't know what, and I was pretty, at the time, really wanting to find solutions that weren't pharmaceutical in nature, just because of family history with that. I just have a family history of not having good responses to pharmaceutical medications. So I was like, okay, what can I try? So I think that sort of forms the basis of what can I try that to help myself cope in a healthy way. So I started the meditation practice, and then I ended up meeting my now future husband.
No way.
We had started, my friend convinced me to sign up for Hinge.
Okay.
And because I was adamant that I wouldn't date anyone in the hospital. I didn't want to marry another doctor or date anyone or whatever. So I was like, I want to get out of the hospital as much as possible, that scene. So, and then through friends of friends is when I ended up sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony and then also experimenting with psilocybin. And I think because I entered into this space through ayahuasca, which is a ceremonial, very intentional use of psychedelics as a medicine, I brought that same intention to every time I worked with psilocybin. And I started experiencing, just profound shifts in my consciousness. I would say I largely came into it more from a place of curiosity, not with the intention of healing myself. In fact, I was a little scared of what would come up in these journeys, just with my own I had a lot of unprocessed grief from my father passing away suddenly when I was 20.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I have a very similar, which is interesting, but my dad passed away when I was 28. It wasn't suddenly, it was a year, but I mean, we have so much to talk about to get into this, but my best friend is very, very deep down this road doing this, and it has completely changed her life. Grew up with immense anxiety, eating disorders, depression, started going on all these anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants, ended up finding this medicine, finding first ayahuasca and then onto psilocybin, and it has also completely changed her life, off of her antidepressants. So for me, I'm starting to have these conversations, and I know this conversation is happening so much more, and there's so many people so curious about this. I think the one thing that I find hard is, I recently went on antidepressants, just making it personal for a second. Recently went on antidepressants a year and a half ago, and have been just feeling so good that I'm so nervous. I know that you have to go off them in order to start this kind of journey. I feel nervous to go off it, and I feel nervous for, again, also what is to come up. And I'm sure with you, did you go into your first experience with an intention about your father, to connect with your father, or what was the first specific intention that you went in for your first experience?
That was not my intention.
Okay. Or was it just to chill out because you were so fucking stressed and tired?
Yeah, in fact, I had bottled up so much of that grief that I never spoke about it. It just felt too scary to even go there. And so that was, I think, going into my first experience, my husband, Mike, he was my boyfriend at the time. He went first and had the experience first with ayahuasca with a really good friend of his who's since become a brother to me.
Amazing.
And so, I had a loving, trusting relationship with him. And so I was like, hey, you go be the canary in the coal mine.
Try this and let me know how it goes. Yeah.
And I think actually a lot of women come into psychedelics through that kind of path, which is because I think there's something about the level of risk tolerance that sometimes there's a differentiation there, largely.
It's true with everything.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting to think about, because even with the gummies, it's the women are so much more nervous to eat them than men are. It's such something to look into.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that was definitely our case. And he was sharing, I peppered him with questions after it. I was like, what was it like? Can you describe it? And it really is so hard to distill down into words what it's like. He had described it just a huge expansion of consciousness, and then being able to direct his attention into any particular area, like a spotlight, just in a way that, and illuminate, aspects of whatever it was that he was contemplating in a way that he just couldn't in your normal state of consciousness.
That sounds amazing. I've never had it explained to me like that.
I just thought that was so interesting.
Like, you can direct where your attention and energy goes, and then you're not necessarily directing what's happening, but you're like, okay, I want to think about, I want to direct my attention to my husband, and then like see what comes up with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, I say top down and bottom up. You can sort of, that's the whole idea behind setting an intention to help kind of guide your experience, because I mean, because these experiences are so long and your sense of time is dilated, it feels actually much longer than it is. There is so much opportunity for the journey to go in any different direction. And so if you can come in with a particular intention, that can help to guide some aspects of the journey. But I would say that I went in for that first one with the really more just, my intention was curiosity and openness, just an openness and willingness to be shown something that I have never experienced before. And I know now that deep down it was something that my heart, my soul, my psyche, however you can characterize it, was actually seeking the whole time I've been alive.
It's so crazy. It's like it's something that you don't know that's missing, and then it finds it.
Yes.
It's so wild.
That was the distinct feeling and experience. It was almost like a massive even though there's a lot of anticipation beforehand, there was also just this massive exhalation of relief.
Interesting.
That there were aspects to my psyche and consciousness that were completely hidden to me, that I was now able to access.
So, like, what specifically? Like, what were some of the things that you started to notice that you remember after the first time?
There was just, there's different ways to characterize psychedelic experiences. One way that they, have some language around it now is that that first experience, I was sort of fortunate, or I don't know, it just how it happened for me, the setting and my mindset and the intention going into it. But I had this just totally transpersonal, mystical, ego-dissolving experience. And so I was... I had no idea how tightly coupled I was in my identity, my sort of egoic identity of who I am and all of that, and my beliefs about the world. All of that dissolved away to a deeper level of truth that was no longer distorted by my own sort of personal lived
view
experience.
On everything.
Yeah. It felt like a returning home to almost like the state of consciousness that perhaps we are in before we're born or after we live on this plane. And so it's like this sort of more base level of reality outside of the normal 3D reality. There was a connection with just unconditional, universal love, like a divine kind of love, a receiving of messages that were just a deeply felt sense knowing, or what I call gnosis, of just an embodiment of ancient wisdom that was coming through this medicine, that reminded me of what's actually important in this life. And so all of that,
true to you.
Yes, and it was just like a coming home, a deep remembrance, and just an awakening. It really was an awakening for me spiritually. I really, up until that point, didn't have any sort of spiritual life. Like that just didn't really, I was
exist
this
for you.
Yeah, I was this like scientific materialist, maybe I was in the exploration, I would say, like agnostic, but But yeah, there was something that was awakened there that afterwards just set me on a path to, I just became a full-blown psychonaut after that.
Yeah. So I'm like, so then you start probably with your doctor hat on and your medicine experience, start digging into the science behind it.
I fortunately hadn't read that much online before my first ayahuasca experience. It was just through friends. And I'm glad I didn't, because you can read all sorts of crazy stories.
I'm not one of those people. Ignorance is bliss for me. Just let me experience it for the first time.
Don't prime yourself by other people's experiences.
Yeah, because we are all so different. So it's like, why operate from a place of fear if we don't have to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, but after that, I did start to kind of read what I could, and there wasn't a ton. I wasn't aware of the science. A lot of the science is becoming, at least with respect to psilocybin, was starting to become more mainstream right in the same time that I started experimenting with these things. So that's when I actually attended this conference at UCLA on psychedelics, and that's when I saw some of the leading researchers in the field start sharing about just psychedelics in general, psilocybin more specifically. And that's when I also was learning a lot more about trauma, like adverse childhood experiences, type of trauma, understanding traumatic experiences and how they affect our nervous system, understanding just a little bit more about consciousness in general, just how our the neuroscience of how our brains reconstruct reality for us, and how psychedelics have this ability to shut down the default mode network, the neural pathways that we normally inhabit in normal waking states of consciousness, which then allow other neural pathways to sort of come online.
To like fire up.
And and then also there's this extended state of increased neuroplasticity after the event that then through sort of intentional practice, you can actually rewire your nervous system.
So it's really so amazing. And I'm like, my best friend, she tries to share this with me and is like, she's dying for me to try it. And it just, the way it sounds so magical, and it sounds, but it's not. I know magical is not probably the appropriate word, but I think that it feels like a way to kind of like reconnect with the true you. So how did you then so you started experiencing this on your own and experimenting with this, and then how did you take that and shift it into an actual practice and what you're doing today?
Yeah, I say that I had to explore sort of all aspects of my own psyche and understand myself at, we have the conscious level, and then there's the subconscious, and then the unconscious, understanding my own personal wounds and how they manifest, and how I show up, and then just continue to further refine my understanding of health and healing and what all of that really means. And so but I was, about halfway through my residency, I was noticing all of the science that was starting to be published. Psilocybin was starting to go mainstream. The FDA gave it breakthrough therapy status in 2018, which was right when I was about halfway through my residency training. And I was spending all of my free time, I had very little free time, but whatever free time I had, I was reading and learning about psychedelics and consciousness. I was not picking up orthopedic surgery journals and reading about like hip replacements.
It was like your side hustle.
It was a total side hustle already. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is where I'm really passionate. This is incredible that institutions like Johns Hopkins University, NYU are publishing this incredible data to show how powerful these medicines are. I was like, this is going to become like mainstream. It's just a matter of time. And I was like, I think I want to practice with psychedelic medicines. I just didn't know how. At the time, there was no path. They were totally illegal. And I was already well invested on this path of becoming an orthopedic surgeon. So I was like, you know what? I will just finish out my training. I had this dream of, doing fellowship at Harvard. I still wanted to go chase after that dream. And it was amazing to see how my work with plant medicines actually was helping me in that, in the sense that I was way less stressed this time around about matching into my fellowship than I was for residency. It totally changed my relationship to my work identity, my self-worth around my work identity, and also just how I processed stress and how I, being able to truly let go of things that I can't control completely and focus on the things that I can completely. And so my last year of training, this was 2020, I was in Boston, and that's when Measure 109 in Oregon passed, which was the ballot measure that legalized psilocybin in Oregon. Okay. And so that made headline news, or at least in the psychedelic world, for anyone who's paying attention. I was paying attention to that. That was the big news from that election.
We're going to Oregon Trail.
Well, and so I was like, that's going to be ground zero for the,
all the research and the practicing and everything. Yeah.
Yes. But I still at the time this was in the middle of the pandemic, and also with pediatric orthopedic surgery, super subspecialized field, there's only so many positions that open up in the country each year. And of course, life would have it where a position opened up in Portland.
No way.
And so I was like, I interviewed for that job. I still wasn't sure if I was going to get it or not. And then they made me an offer, and then it just became obvious, like, we need to go to Portland. So so we moved there. I started my practice. I was working for Kaiser at the time, Kaiser Permanente. And I was thinking I was going to work for about, at least 5 years or so. Just, keep the side hustle hustle.
Totally. See what if it could do anything, but do your job.
Yeah. And my side hustle was just studying. I wasn't facilitating or anything like that. And so, but then a good friend of mine passed along the application for psilocybin facilitator training program that was started by Tom Eckert, who was the same person who had spearheaded the Measure 109 initiative. He was starting a facilitator training program. And so I applied, I got in, and I started training to become a facilitator again on the side.
Right. And does that all happen virtually? This is something that you do. Like, what does the course look like?
It was a 6-month training program. We met on average 1 to 2 times a week virtually, and then one time a month all day for an intensive.
Got it.
And so I started, meeting all these people who are also working in the psilocybin space, and it just became abundantly clear that almost like on an energetic level, when I was working on anything psilocybin, psychedelic medicine related, I was lit, expansive, energized. When I had to do anything orthopedic surgery related, even though it was such a beautiful job and I did beautiful work there were so many aspects of that work that were no longer in alignment with who I had become. And so I actually had to work with a coach. I hired my good girlfriend who's also a coach, and just to help me sort through all of the emotions and then the tug and pull between my mind and my, the rational thing to do, but my heart, what my intuition was telling me. And so at the end of that 6 months of working with her, I came to the conclusion that I needed to resign from my job way sooner than I thought I would, and then go into starting this psilocybin facilitation practice, which is really, I call it now psilocybin assisted health coaching.
Okay.
And so in the same way that you might work with a health coach or even a physician, it's leveraging the neuroplasticity that's available with psilocybin, either through macrodose journeys or even microdoses, to catalyze the change that you feel stuck, or in wherever you feel stuck with respect to your health. Could be, of course, a lot of people seek me out for mental health issues, but it oftentimes is intimately tied with physical health issues as well. So yeah, I started the practice, and it's been amazing. It feels like the medicine I was meant to be practicing the whole time.
I can see it in your face, and it feels like all the stars aligned, but also there was so much work that you were doing internally to make these things happen too, that like can't go unnoticed. It's so important to connect to that like you were putting all that energy out there, and then this opportunity came to you, and that's so important, and that can happen. So now what does your practice look like? Is it someone coming to you, like what does it kind of look like on a daily basis? And are you seeing people through a certain period of time, or is it just like people come to you for an experience and then not for a while, or how does it usually work?
So I usually have people reaching out to me who they've heard about psilocybin, maybe they've oftentimes read about it in The Economist, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, or maybe they've read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, or seen the Netflix series. And often, almost everybody has tried conventional methods of helping themselves, whether it's therapy or antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicines, but they feel stuck. So they're just not able to, maybe it helped them for a while, or they feel like they've laid a lot of the wonderful groundwork, but they're ready to welcome in some change up in their normal state. And so oftentimes they're looking to do a macrodose journey or a large dose of psilocybin. That's where, when you look at the clinical trials for psilocybin for the treatment of either treatment-resistant depression or anxiety or PTSD, maybe addiction, like alcohol use disorder or something like that, they're largely with large dose psilocybin. And the results are incredible. So after just one, large dose journey, or maybe two, the benefits are significant and sustained for months and years afterwards. And so a lot of people, they may not, I have people who come to me too who are looking to maybe taper off of their medications, but again, they're nervous about that. And so they feel like the medications aren't helping them anymore, but they feel like if they were to take it away, they're just worried about really slipping. And so it sort of runs the gamut. People, I would say the most common scenario is someone coming in to do one large dose journey. And then just seeing what happens after that. If you're, and what's nice about psilocybin is that psilocybin is safe to take with a lot of these pharmaceutical medications. Some of these medications, mostly, let's talk a little bit more specific, say the SSRIs or the SNRIs, most commonly prescribed antidepressants, they can have a slight blunting or diminishing effect, but that is not in everybody. It seems to be only in about a third of people, and even then it seems that if we just go up a little bit more on the psilocybin dose, you can overcome a lot of those effects. So you can actually have a psilocybin experience while on your medications.
Okay. Is microdosing obviously an option for someone that, like, do you work with someone to see if that's works for them, right? Like microdosing throughout the day.
Yeah. So I have coached people with microdosing. So the microdosing is a little bit nuanced, that conversation, because for several reasons. One is when it comes to psilocybin microdosing, it's actually we're not allowed to dispense it as a medication. So if you want to microdose with psilocybin in Oregon legally, then you would have to come into the center to do it with me.
Got it.
So I actually facilitate microdose, weekly microdose ceremonies. So that would be microdosing on a weekly basis. And I combine it with sound bath guided meditation. It's an amazing, I have to say, it's the offering that I wanted. It's so deeply relaxing and restorative. And I believe that you can have all the benefits of microdosing on a once a week basis. There's all different protocols. You can take it you can microdose every other day, or 2 days on, 1 day off, or during the week, off the weekends. I think microdosing is especially interesting for support when tapering off of a medication.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. It can be used alongside the tapering, and I call it using it as a bridge therapy. So for a lot of people, the experience of tapering off of a psychiatric medication is often the toughest when you're going from the last small doses of it to completely off. That transition can be rough. Not for everyone, but often. And so the idea of using a bridge therapy is that you start the microdosing a little bit before you're about to come completely off, come off of the medication, continue the microdosing for a few weeks, and then you can come off. It's a lot easier to come off.
Right. That makes sense.
Michael Pollan wrote a book called The Botany of Desire, which just acknowledges that humans have been altering their state of consciousness with plants probably since the beginning of time. Yes.
It's good to know.
It's part of the human experience.
Yes.
And it's universal across cultures and across time. So I think this, this puritanical, emphasis on sobriety being somehow morally superior is just that it's Puritan as part of our puritanical roots. And so I'm a big advocate of exploring your consciousness responsibly,
completely,
with especially since these are just plants and things that grow out of the earth.
Exactly. Right.
And so cannabis, it's been fascinating because cannabis was becoming legalized. It became legal in California when I was in my training. It's everywhere. And I also was noticing big time the adverse effects of alcohol on my nervous system.
Same.
And so I was actually looking for an alternative to alcohol and actually in sort of Los Angeles culture, there are a lot of people like that. Where you go to parties and now people are offering, an edible or something instead of just alcohol.
It's Cali sober. Yes. That's what it's called. Yeah.
And so I loved that. Yeah. Just because, I wasn't, going to be hungover the next day.
Right. But that wasn't the culture. Like we were out drinking and then... Yeah, that wasn't the culture, but it is now, and it's so refreshing that is the culture now. So tell me, how can it be good for us, specifically THC and CBD?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful just to first talk about sort of cannabis as a whole plant. And then there are the cannabinoids within cannabis. There's two most talked about ones are THC and CBD. THC being the psychoactive one, and then CBD is not. And it's fascinating actually as I learned more about this to see actually how different these two molecules within cannabis are. And I think it's helpful to actually really separate them. Sort of in the conversation. THC is the psychoactive component of cannabis. It's what's responsible for giving you the altered state of consciousness, the maybe the mood elevating effects, the stress relieving effects, that sort of thing. Although CBD is reported to also have some of those effects as well. I think to answer your question of like how it can be beneficial for us, I think it's all again returning back to this principle of setting and intention. And I think if you can bring that level of awareness to your use of any psychoactive substance, whether it's alcohol or cannabis or anything else, psychedelics, that will help sort of inform your relationship to the plant and the medicine, and also what benefits you may get out of that relationship. And so it's different paradigm really of forming a relationship and then understanding how those other factors, your intentional use of it, how your mindset is going into the use of it, alters your experience of it.
Completely.
And I think it's, there's a number of ways that it can be beneficial. It just all depends on what you're looking for. So I think one of the most common is to help with stress and anxiety. This is probably one of the most common, other than pain.
Yeah, which is so interesting just because I feel like so many people are nervous that it is going to make them so much more anxious,
That's a common concern.
Yeah.
And I think there's a very simple way to address that, and that's around dosing.
Yeah, totally.
It's totally dependent. I mean, just think about your experience of alcohol.
Right.
How it is after one drink or having, 5 drinks.
Right.
It's different. And so the cannabis is no different in that way. It's a very dose-dependent medicine. As you take more, it's going to have different effects and different, depth of experience and all of that. And it's really interesting with THC in particular. It has this sort of bimodal distribution of effects where at lower doses it is shown to help decrease anxiety, decrease stress, but then at higher doses it can paradoxically increase it.
That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with just like, alcohol is embedded so deeply within our culture that, our parents drink alcohol, we're around it, we're exposed to it, we have plenty of opportunities to experiment with it and understand how it affects us. But we don't really with cannabis. Cannabis is just relatively newer,
right?
A lot newer.
Right.
In our culture. And so it's the same thing. It's just understanding dose. Like every time you take cannabis, you should know what dose you're taking, ideally,
Completely.
And if it's, I think so many of us have, homemade edible stories or something like brownies,
Completely,
like
where we had no idea how much was in there. You weighed it, how, I don't even know. But yeah, I never partook because I was too nervous. But that's why for me, the high confectionery gummies have obviously been perfect because I can dose myself. Like 1 or 2 sleep ones I know is perfect for me for nighttime, but for the day I may want a little bit more because I know myself, you know?
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about, something being able to, this concept of titrating. So you start low, go slow.
Right.
And there's, if you have like a 1 milligram increment, you're going to have a much more control over your dosing than a 10 milligram increment.
Completely.
And there's a big difference. And then the other thing I think is really important to understand is that we're talking about edible or oral ingestion of cannabis, which is going to have a much longer onset of activity. So in other words, like it can be 30, 45, or in some people, depending on if you've recently eaten or not, an hour and a half before you feel the effects. And so that, again, is just like education around how long it takes to feel the effects. And so people often make the mistake of
eating too many.
It's like, I don't feel anything. Let's do more.
Totally.
Don't do that.
No, do not do that. And ours tastes so good too that it's hard to not do that, but don't do that. Well, we talked about obviously helping that the microdosing can help with reducing stress and anxiety, and then pain as well. Any like chronic pain or physical pain that you're feeling. For me, I know it really helps with my headaches and sleep. Like, can we talk about because so many people are nervous about taking the sleep and then feeling groggy in the morning. Can you talk about what's in the THC and the CBD that's specifically helpful for our bodies for sleep?
Yeah, so there isn't a ton of sort of scientific evidence for this. So a lot of this is just reports on what I call citizen scientists. So people who, I'm a big advocate of experimenting responsibly after you're informed on yourself, because each and every person is so individual with their physiology and with their state, their mind and all of that. But it is widely reported that THC can help with falling asleep faster. It is known to change the architecture of sleep. So that's looking at so there's different stages of sleep. There's non-rapid eye movement sleep or non-REM sleep, and then REM sleep. REM sleep is that sleep that we're in when you're in the dream state and all of that. And so THC can affect the REM stage of sleep, which can help with feeling more refreshed, but it's dependent on each and every person. And again, to address that concern about waking up groggy, again, it's dose dependent. Completely. And so again, start low, go slow. If you notice that you take, half a milligram, you're okay, or 1 milligram, you're okay. But then at 2 milligrams, okay, I'm waking up a little groggy. That's just, again, that dose dependent effect. And then the other thing I'll say too about that is that all of this is whenever you're microdosing and also sensitizing yourself to the medicine with other modalities. So this is making sure to take care of all the other things that impact sleep and not fall into the relationship of, oh, I need to take this thing to fall asleep. I think just bringing awareness to that is also just so important when we're talking about these things. But again, we're talking about doses that are so low, and especially when you compare it to the other alternatives for helping sleep, something like Ambien, that what's nice about working, especially if you're working with the whole plant extract, is that you're working with all these other alkaloids that are also present in the plant, and it has a much more of an adaptogenic effect with our physiology than something like a hard-hitting pharmaceutical like Ambien would have. And so what cannabis does is it plays this homeostatic role, bringing us into balance. And so whatever it is that your system is maybe deficient in, or maybe out of balance with, maybe you're just super activated in your sympathetic nervous system from a busy day, or you're anxious about something else and it's impacting your sleep, well, then taking a small dose of cannabis that then helps your system come back into more of a parasympathetic state to relax and actually help with the onset of sleep is going to be so much better for you than I probably shouldn't put like a value judgment on it, but it can be a nicer alternative to work with than with a pharmaceutical in terms of side effects and also dependency and that sort of thing.
That's what I felt. Like, I have been on these antidepressants for 1.5 years, and I get, in the middle of the night, I get like these really, really crazy sweats. And I wake up drenched in sweat. And so I've been talking to my doctor, and she's changed medications a bunch of times. And the other day she asked me if I wanted to go on, I can't remember what this medication was called, but it was like an anti-seizure medication that would help with sweating in the middle of the night, but also would make me tired. And I was like, what? You just are offering a sleeping medication. I didn't even ask for sleeping medication. I'm getting really sweaty in the middle of the night. And then honestly, that moment, I right after my phone call with my psychiatrist, I called Timmy and I was like, I need to leave my psychiatrist. This is the second time that she's tried to prescribe me something that I didn't even ask for, instead of figuring out what the situation was. And it's just, this conversation is just coming at such a perfect time, and especially also after I listened to Bill Maher and this doctor and talking about RFK and all this stuff. Obviously, it's just like, yes, you're not saying that this is a better alternative. We're not saying that, but it's definitely worth a try because it feels more natural. That's my take on it all,
Yeah. The problem becomes when you have these pharmaceutical medications just come with known side effects that are really strong, And then we fall into, I think, like most medical doctors, they have their toolkit, which is pharmaceutical drugs mostly. And so we can fall into this sort of vicious cycle where we add a medication, there's a side effect, and we add another medication for the side effect, and then that has side effects, and then before you know it, you're on this polypharmacy.
Right. And you're just treating all the side effects instead of getting to the root cause of the issue. I'm so sick of that. And I can see how this is happening for someone who is a really, really, really healthy 40-year-old who really does not need to be on anything. Like, I'm choosing to be on my antidepressants because it has helped me majorly at a time when I really needed it. And I'm so curious about this, and that's why I've been having more and more conversations, and like I wonder, I do have those questions of like, do I want to be on antidepressants for the rest of my life? Like, and I'm sure so many people come to you with that exact question.
Oh, yeah. So incredibly common. Yeah. And, what I'll say about antidepressants is that, look, when you are in an acute crisis, something happens, and you still need to show up to your job. You need to show up as, for your family, your mom, whatever. You have to function. You don't have the ability to just, not be functional.
Yeah.
And so
lay in bed.
Yeah,
like
lay
what
in bed
you
all
want to
day.
do.
Exactly.
Yeah, you don't have that option.
You don't have that option. Then yes, that's exactly what these medications were designed for. And they're, but that they were mostly designed to be used in acute crisis. They were never designed to be used on a chronic basis, long term. And the data that we don't actually have data at all for what the long term effects of chronic use of antidepressants over several years or decades is. And yet what happens is that, again, because most doctors, or actually there are a lot of people who aren't even doctors who are prescribing these medications, nurse practitioners or non-psychiatrists, a lot of general practitioners. And there's not enough education on how to take people back off of these medications. So, of course, there's all sorts of incentives to put people on these medications, from, pharmaceutical companies and all of that and there's a lot of education on how to put people on these medications. But again, what it takes to help someone taper off of the medicines, a lot of people don't have education on that.
And it's not really a conversation that your doctor has with you when you start.
Exactly. There really can, when used over a long period of time, what happens is that there are tolerance effects, just like with anything that you're using over time. So a lot of times, I have so many people coming to me with this, like they helped initially a lot, but then over time, they stopped being beneficial. But then there's this physiologic dependence that has formed on it.
If I don't take mine for 2 days, I start to get like flu symptoms. I start to feel achy and weak and
withdrawal like anything else. And that for a long time that wasn't even acknowledged in the medical profession, that there was a withdrawal from syndrome from these medicines, which totally gaslit so many people.
Completely. People that are already like cannot be gaslit, like cannot deal.
And so there's I think that what's interesting too to bring up as part of this conversation, as part of the conversation, is that there's a really fascinating paper that was published by one of the leading psychedelic researchers. His name is Robin Carhart Harris. He's at UCSF now, but it's called A Tale of Two Receptors. It's looking at the serotonin receptor system, which is so intimately plays a huge role in all sorts of mood conditions, depression, anxiety, that sort of thing, and that what antidepressants do is function mostly at one type of serotonin receptor that helps you with what's called passive coping. So that's that when you're in acute crisis, you just need to cope. You don't have any capacity to make any major changes in your life. Passive coping is what's needed. That's what antidepressants can help you with. But then what psilocybin acts mainly at another subtype of serotonin receptor that is theorized to help you with active coping. And so when you're finally out of the acute crisis period and you're in a more stable time of your life and you are ready to make some changes, that's when it can be helpful to start to work with psilocybin to make whatever changes that you need to make. You might not even be aware of what changes are needed to get you into a better space mentally.
To cope, that makes so much sense. Okay. This was so amazing. All right. I want to ask you more, just a few personal questions. For you right now, like, what does a typical day in your life look like?
Oh, I don't know if there's a typical day
I
right
know.
now.
Every day looks different. I mean, you're recording your podcast.
Yeah, I have a little podcast. So I do interviews for that. I'm making a bit more content just around psilocybin and the education piece.
Necessary. We need voices like yours on social.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
And I love it. It's so fun. Let's see. I have my facilitation days, and then calls with my clients. Most of my clients are from out of state who are traveling to Oregon, but I have some local clients as well. I have my client calls, and then I have my in-person facilitation days. I'm either working from home or working out of our service center, which is like another home. It's a beautiful, beautiful space.
And do clients usually sleep over if someone is coming in for like a macro dose to work with you and you're facilitating it in this space, how long is the process? And then, where are they staying?
So most macrodose journeys are about 6 hours long. That's the minimum amount of time you have to spend at the center for after you take the medicine. Ends up being more like a 7-hour day total with some time on either end. And then you're actually not allowed to stay at the center. I wish people could spend the night. Maybe future, regulations
You'll create
will
your own
change.
center.
Yeah, it's more the regulatory situation. But and so people will you either go home or if you're
you're fine. So 7 hours you're in there and then
afterwards, yes, you leave. Yeah. And so I joke it's like outpatient surgery, not inpatient.
Totally. And
you come and then you leave.
And you leave feeling a whole new person with no scars and no pain.
Oh gosh, don't promise that. But I always say too, to like if you can carve out the entire next day.
Yeah.
Where you're not doing anything.
Right.
You're
just really let everything recover.
Yes. Yeah. Integrating, spending time out in nature, journaling, that sort of thing. We have a session, a 1-hour session in person the next day after a journey. And then I usually follow up with my clients a week after. And then a subset of them will continue to work with me on a monthly basis where we're just, continuing to integrate the insights that came through.
Got it.
That's what that looks like.
It's so amazing. I'm doing it with you. We're doing it.
That would be a dream.
I know. Jenna was like, we should do like a team one. And I was like, honestly, I think for my first time, I would need to just go and do it on my own.
That's most people.
Right?
Most people want to do a solo or individual. Their first time is just too much to manage the group dynamics.
I don't want to think about, because I'm already so conscious of like the environment around me and what people are thinking of me. And so I like perform in a weird way, and obviously something I'm working on a daily basis. I wouldn't want to feel like anybody was looking at me besides you, and I wouldn't feel like judged in a way.
Yeah.
I have so many more questions specifically about this, but we're gonna do a part 2. Where can everybody find you and learn more about you?
Oh, sure. Probably the best thing to do would be I have a website that's just TracyTownsendMD.com if you want to learn more about me specifically. And then the organization that I'm helping to lead, that is the service center, the psilocybin facilitation, is called Project Circle.
Okay, amazing.
And so people can you can just Google us or project-circle.org to learn more about psilocybin facilitation through that organization.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for educating us.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Excited to party with you tonight.
Yeah.
Sleep party.
Pajama party.
Exactly.